All right, we're rolling. Welcome, everybody. July 5th, back from another Node Operator Roundtable, and I will pass it over to Brian to kick us off.
Excellent. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, everyone. Thanks for joining the call. We're going to kick it off with some quick agenda building to get what's on everybody's minds. We'll try to keep these high level at first and not go into details, so that we can capture the list and then prioritize that list as a group. So just before we started recording, Ross mentioned that he had an item that he wanted to discuss. I'll let you recap, Ross.
Thanks. So I just wanted to bring up, we want to test version 4 dot whatever, and we want to test it on Wax, which is the busiest network of them all. It's the one that we can really, it's all great to do it on test nets and everywhere else, but if you really want to get a litmus test for how good the software is rolling, we need to put it out on the battlefield, which is Wax, which is very, very, very busy at the moment. Mm-hmm. So where we're at the moment, Wax has got a slightly different construct to vanilla Antelope. So the guy that actually does the build for us, or at least he does the framework for us to build, hasn't put version 4.0.3 into the Wax version for us to compile, because he's actually got an open issue at the moment. And when I asked him about it today, I said, are you just waiting on the ship issue? He's like, yes, but I believe there are some other issues. And Matthew and Michael, they both had some challenges. So where we kind of at now is we want to be testing, providing some feedback, but we've already found some bugs that make it not production ready for us. And we just want to get some feedback. Everybody here wants to run it version 4. Most of us are still stuck on version 3 on Wax.
Okay. Yeah, we'll circle back to that. Matthew, it sounded like you also had a list of topics as well.
Well, it sounds like there was some requests to change the configuration in Jungle, to change the parameters of how big the blocks could be, and apparently there's been some testing that shows that might be reasonable to run bigger block sizes, more transactions. So I was just wondering if someone could share what the process was to come up with those test results.
Bigger is better, man. Bigger is always better.
Bigger is better, yeah, sure.
You have other topics as well, or is that the primary one?
Well, the same one as Ross. When's the 404 release with some interesting fixes?
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other topic requests? All right. So let's start at the top. The or.x stuff. So we do have another sort of patch release planned. Details on that are coming. I'm not sure whether the specific issues that are blocking doing builds for Wax are resolved in that release. So that's something I'm going to have to dig into. I see Kevin kind of doing a tiny little head shake, so I'm guessing not. But I'll look into that and we'll figure out more about that soon. Let's see what else. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything else to add on this.
So is the plan to do a 404 release, soonish, or this is like months away?
No, soonish is definitely the plan. We were actually planning on doing some communication about that this week, but it's it's looking like our best move is to push that off to next week. So yeah, we'll have details about that as soon as possible, likely early next week.
Okay. I know that we all kind of got a little bit like, I don't know what the word is, kerfuffled when we started speaking about version 5 last week.
Yeah.
When we've still got version 4 that we actually want to run and share some results and experiences on. Like I said, you can run it on any testnet you want, but no testnet is the same kind of playing field as something that's in production. So we can cover our bases in a testnet and everything looks good, but at some point you want to put it out on the mine site at the coal face to see how it actually does under some real world load.
Yep.
And that's kind of like where we're at. So there's a few things that just kind of slowing us down. And
yeah,
we want to test it. We want to provide. Actually, we want to use it and we want to provide feedback. And that's kind of like what we are.
Yeah. So I was actually reflecting on this after last week's call. And, so first, just to recap, sort of the point I was trying to make last week, and then what I want to do about it. So, 5.0 is intended to be sort of a protocol upgrade consensus release thing, right? So there's more kind of coordination and lead time involved with actually getting it deployed on a network. And so as a result, slippage on that is challenging and can cause more sort of downstream issues of causing other, the next release to be delayed and so on and so forth. So we want to try and stick to that schedule. And the reason, of course, that we're talking about 5.0, what feels like early is because actually internally it's feels pretty late. We're down to the wire on what can actually fit into 5.0 at this point. Now the thing I want to do about it is there's definitely really valid feedback about 4.0 and the fact that we're coming up on releasing 5.0 and 4.0 isn't really meaningfully deployed at this point. So I do think some retrospective would be valuable here, and I also think that having involvement directly with with node operators in that retrospective could be very useful. So if there are folks who are willing to participate in a retrospective, sort of a separate meeting that wouldn't be recorded because it would be very sort of what's the word I'm looking for, candid, right? Feedback in both directions and that sort of thing. Please shoot me a Telegram message, because that's something that I think I'd like to get scheduled after we've resolved some of these issues, right? The focus is first on resolving and then reflecting, right? And again, I just shared again my Telegram handle in case any of you don't have that. Is it appropriate to change the subject over to the bigger block size? Or is there more anyone wants to discuss on this? Okay.
Real quick on that, is there any opportunity for these issues people are running into? Are they getting logged as GitHub issues? Are they the sort of things that can be in that way?
Yeah, they are. They are. Yeah, both of them are there. The latest one, I see it's gone into what you guys call the backlog. It's the one that Matthew and Michael logged 2 days ago, I think.
Yeah. So there's if you're sort of what's the word, behind the curtain sort of thing here. Like we've got kind of a few different sort of statuses, right? Like, so one is triage. When an item is first created, is triage. And usually when it has the triage label, it means that it hasn't been sort of explicitly prioritized at this stage, but it doesn't mean that nobody's looked at it. Kevin in particular is like Johnny on the spot and tends to look at all of those. And he pushes me things that he feels are particularly urgent. And then, I take a look at it and prioritize it in that backlog, which just really means stack rank. So it's not, if you don't necessarily see that because it's a team GitHub projects thing. So you don't necessarily see where the priority is with it. And that triage label drops off, and it usually will get the label LGTM, which stands for looks good to me, which just generally means that it has enough information for us to act on, and is something that we should act on at some point, either urgently or later, right? And then of course, there's the typical to do, doing, done type stuff, right? In progress and in review, like those sorts of statuses. There's also a status called icebox, which is usually things will drop to the icebox if it's not necessarily that it's not important, but it's sort of become obvious that we're not going to be addressing it in the near term. It's just sort of clean up so that the signal to noise ratio can be kept more reasonable. So it's not deleted, but it's hidden from view for us for a while, right? And we periodically review the icebox to decide if something should be resurrected. Anyway, that's maybe details that you didn't ask for, but Oh, there's also a sprint. I just guess I didn't talk about sprints. When we add things to a milestone, it means that we have a target release in mind for it. And there's some technical elements to that too, of like what branch we want to actually make changes to and that sort of thing. And then the sprint, when it gets a sprint, that typically means that we're intending to work on it over the next week or two. So yeah, those are some signals that if you're curious on spying on us, you could sort of follow that. So yeah, bigger block size. Does anybody want to say anything by way of introduction of this topic?
Sure, I'll that. So a bit of history, right? So the block size now, and here particularly we're talking about CPU allocation per block, so not really size per se. There's the net is more in terms of like the actual size that we're creating, which can be a bottleneck for when we're doing performance testing. Typically, if we're doing like transfer performance testing, we'll hit actually net bottleneck before we hit any sort of CPU bottleneck. But anyway, for mainnet, that's typically not a problem because your transactions you're executing typically aren't as fast as just a simple token transfer. They're typically more CPU intense than that. So you will eventually hit a CPU max for a block. That's currently on the EOS mainnet, and I believe same for Telos, Wax. And I'm not sure about UX, but for most, maybe all networks out there, that's been set to 200 milliseconds. Now, in the history of the chain, I believe at the launch, and I might remember this slightly wrong, but it doesn't really matter that much. I think at launch it was 100 milliseconds. It's very, very low, I believe, at launch, and then we upped it. I think to 200 milliseconds. At one point in history, it was increased to 250, I think, and then reduced down to 225, and then reduced back down to 200. Those were in response to issues, a lot of stability issues in terms of being able to consume a block and then also be able to then produce a block in time. Since those issues, the chain has had many improvements in terms of the way that it consumes blocks, the way that it produces blocks, the way that block producers have the ability to specify CPU effort. So there's lots of changes that have happened since we kind of landed on 200 milliseconds and lived with 200 milliseconds for a long time. And our performance runs that we do for like standing up a chain and doing performance testing, we see stability at much higher settings than that. Now, granted, we're not doing round the world sort of performance testing there in terms of like network latencies and that sort of thing. But there has been huge amounts of improvements in the way that like blocks are consumed, processed, and the way transactions are also processed. And so we feel that it's time, or it's appropriate at this point that limit can be increased. You have 500 milliseconds basically of block time, if you will, between blocks, in terms of between the start of a block. And so you currently have 300 milliseconds, if you will, of free time. Now that free time is used for applying blocks and processing transactions and doing other things. But what we're suggesting is to increase the 200 milliseconds to 250 milliseconds because we believe the chain is capable of handling the amount of transaction throughput.
So we believe it is, but we didn't do any actual real world testing from a around the world perspective.
That would be accurate, which would be, one reason obviously we'd want to do this on, Jungle Testnet. Now granted, Jungle Testnet doesn't have the load of EOS mainnet, and then of course you move all of your EOS mainnet doesn't even have the load of WAX. So all these sorts of things are certainly considerations as it gets rolled out to various chains.
Kevin, would it be appropriate and feasible for us to, with coordination with Jungle node operators, run like a scheduled sort of load against that, like using the performance harness or something like that?
We certainly could. They don't really even need our help. They've done that many times in the past. If they're willing to do that, they've got their own scripts that they've used in the past to do that, which are probably more than capable. They certainly could use the performance harness as well. I mean, it could do that, but they've already got stuff set up where it'd be easier for them to see it that way as opposed to using our script, I would imagine. But I mean, they're certainly welcome to.
Yeah, Michael's not here today, but I know he was involved in that in the past. So is that something that's requested to do or advisable to do, or?
I mean, it's hard to answer no to a question like that, right? I mean, obviously, the more testing you do, the better off you are, and something like this, it warrants doing that. Ultimately, I think it kind of rolls back to what else you're saying. Ultimately, stuff like this has to go on mainnets to really see what's going to happen. I mean, yeah, we can do, load testing all we want, but eventually you have to turn it on. With obviously, if you increase it and there's issues, it's easy to decrease it as well, which is what we did in the past. Like we cranked it up, we saw issues, and we cranked it back down. So, I mean, it's not like it's a one-way street.
For context, what type of issue should we expect to see if an issue is going to happen? Right?
Yeah, you see like block producers not producing blocks. It's a big thing. So they're not able to consume the blocks in time and be able to do that. We've addressed that, I think, now with block producers change their CPU effort on their last block now, to where in a lot of cases they put almost nothing in their last block, so it has plenty of time to get to the next node. And so that setting is lower than the 200 millisecond block time in most cases, I think, on a lot of block producers. And so changing this will affect that. It'll still be lower than that for the last block. So in that regard, the stability that we saw in the past, it should not be possible really, because we've got other mitigations against it.
And maybe I'll ask, what is the reason that we want to potentially increase it? And are we talking about EOS, or is this more for WAX?
It's mainly for EOS. It all kind of goes into kind of a number of things that it's just an attempt to be able to process larger and more transactions, and maybe more on terms of larger transactions, in terms of allowing people to set larger contracts, for example, which is something that a lot of people are, I don't know about a lot, but certainly some producers of contracts have run into, wanting to set larger contracts and having to find various workarounds for that, whether splitting it up into multiple contracts and doing, inline calls, which is some big hoops to jump through, to make that happen, where, if you just set a slightly larger contract, then, you'd be good to go there. So there's that. Certainly the EVM support that we have now, a lot of those contracts are larger than what we might typically see with a native EOS transaction. And so allowing larger types of EVM types of transactions are attractive for the network, right? So whether it's larger or more involved types of swaps or whatever it might be, or even just setting EVM contracts, that allows those larger contracts to be able to be executed. So this is somewhat in tandem with the other thing that we've been talking about, which is increasing the node specified max transaction limit from 30 to the on-chain limit of 150. And then, I think we would then talk about increasing that 150 potentially up to maybe 249 or something like that. Or right now, block limit's 200 to 199, so it's just under the block limit, with the idea that, again, we would allow these larger transactions to flow through the network.
Yeah, as long as those large transactions are not somehow failed transactions, which then cause your block producer to produce empty blocks.
That is definitely the trade-off, and certainly a situation that you would definitely hit, right? I mean, if you've got your block set to 200 as it is now, and let's say we crank up, the on-chain right now is 150 for a transaction. So if a node operator would set their max max transaction time, you say 150 or 500 or whatever, so that the on-chain max transaction is enforced, as opposed to a node operator's a subjective limit of 30 or whatever they set it to. Let's say they set it to 150. And yes, that does get you in a situation where somebody submits a transaction that runs for, say, 149 milliseconds or 150 milliseconds and then fails. Then, yeah, you don't have a lot of time left in your block for actually doing anything else, because you spent your entire time evaluating a transaction that ended up failing. And so, yes, there is the opportunity for that to happen, just like there is that opportunity today, only it's, since the limit's smaller, those have to add up. You have to have quite a few of those to add up to a block time to where you actually get a completely empty block.
Yeah. So I guess my worry increasing it too much is that, if we want the network busy and then this fails and then it fails on every single BP around the planet, now all of a sudden we actually have lower throughput than we had before we increased the limit. So, yeah.
And it might just encourage bad habits, whether from smart contract developers or things of the sort, that's just really pushing their problem down the line. and then if people develop based on it, and then they have to reduce it again, it's a problem for them.
Yeah, maybe there needs to be a way of, like we're talking about the auto OC enable for certain things. Maybe there needs to be a way to, well, we approve these people to have higher limits for CPU, but otherwise the regular Joe, uses the smaller one, and then that prevents the abuse. I don't know. Like, okay, the EVM contract, we trust that more, so we'll let it have slightly higher transaction time. But maybe it's going to run OC anyway, so then it will be already faster, so then it won't be a problem.
That's already in 5.0 is is to do that. So yeah, we do have that, and we have talked about, and something that would certainly be looking for feedback, particularly after you guys play around with 5.0, is whether a whitelist for the auto OC is something that would be useful. Right now in 5.0, what the auto OC will do is provide OC's tier up for EOSIO.star accounts, which includes token and includes EVM specifically. But anything else, IBCs, multi-sig, all those benefit from that. Whether there is appetite for enabling that, or BP's being able to enable that for a given whitelisted set of accounts that aren't just EOSIO.
I think that's very useful. Like, especially maybe not as much on EOS, but at least on other Antelope chains where there is other contracts that are considered, they're not EOSIO contracts, but they're considered kind of essential or well-tested or part of the whole system. Then it's much easier to add the whitelist and enable it that way than just keep editing the code within like the build itself within that chain.
Yeah, so there's actually two things here, right? There's enable OC, and then there's, even if you've enabled OC, then give it a higher CPU limit other than the 30 milliseconds or whatever the block producers have set for a transaction.
Right, whether there's like a different max transaction time for a whitelisted set of accounts as well. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I'm not sure that we actually considered that, but that's interesting. One thing that we have talked about recently, which I think is a great idea as well, is to have a different limit for max transaction time for a P2P transaction versus an API transaction. So the fact that, like, once it makes it onto the network, give it a little bit more breathing room as it's traversing the network, so that it doesn't get killed as it's just trying to make its way to.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. Many tuning flags. Speaking of tuning flags, there's duplicate tuning flags for the last offset block time. There's a millisecond one and a percent one.
Yeah, I was thinking about that today.
I know you were thinking about it because you wrote a message about it.
I know. I'm like, but the way that I was thinking is, I don't know what else.
I was just
thinking,
need both. Yeah, can we get rid of one? Why do we need both?
They are identical. Matter of fact, the way it works is it takes the most conservative. Yeah, it takes the most conservative of the two. So if you think you're setting something different when you set one than the other, no, they actually both manipulate the exact same variable in the code. That was just done as a backwards compatibility thing back when we did it. Yeah, and I think we're probably long past like getting rid of one of them.
So which one you get rid of?
Well, that's a good question. I need to go look because we in 5.0 we changed the way like all that kind of works, right? In 5.0 we have the ability of, when a block is exhausted, we immediately start the next block. So once we get into 5.0, it's actually possible that you can do your complete round of blocks within the first, let's see, if it's 200 milliseconds, let's see, you can do 12 of them. You can do your complete 12-second round in 2.4 seconds, and then you'd be done. basically. And so you have a ton of time at the end in there, because now that would only happen if you have queued up transactions that eat up the entire block time to begin with. Now, if you don't, then you're going to fall back and do what it does today. But that setting works slightly differently there. I have to go look at what we did there again.
We got the two settings that Matthew's talking about. One of them is the millisecond offset, and the other one is the CPU effort on last block.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I was thinking that the CPU effort was maybe like less transactions, but if there's not many transactions, not the same as the millisecond offset. So I wasn't sure if they were exactly the same.
Yeah, they're exactly the same. The CPU, the percentage is just does the calculation and calculates the offset, and then uses the offset. So that's all that's really going on there. You can do it either as a literal value, or you can do it as a percentage. And again, like it whether you set it or not, like their default comes in play as well. It always chooses the less or the more conservative of the two values. More conservative here meaning smallest block time that's allowed.
Yeah, so if we clean that up, I think that would be a good thing. The other, since you're talking, since we're talking about this, so if we have one of those failed transactions that takes the entire block time, but our block is actually early now because we already shuffled them all up, can we extend the block time so it keeps going until it reaches its limit on the schedule time?
Yep.
Okay, that's cool.
Yep, that's the way to work. Yep. That's actually the way it works now, except the difference between what we have in 5.0 now is now we always start a block at the second or half second interval, no matter what. That's the part that we're changing, that we won't necessarily always start a block exactly at a second or half second interval. A block can start early if we've exhausted the previous one, but only if we've exhausted.
Yeah. But the end time has not changed. So it can use up to the time when the end time is there. Okay.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And so if you have those failed transactions you're talking about, yeah. And when 5.0, it's going to be better because you're going to have more time to like realize those failed transactions because you're going to be doing it early. Because what happens now in 4.0 and everything prior to it, you start always at second and half second clock time, always right on the dot. And so, but you only have until the end of that time,
or 200 milliseconds, in fact.
Yeah. Well, you actually have more than 200 milliseconds according to your CPU effort and offset time. So you'll have 200 seconds of CPU mix it into a block. You have more than that according to your CPU effort or offset time to try to put that into a block.
Right. So complicated. We need diagrams.
You were nodding and agreeing, so you can make the diagrams.
Okay, I understand the explanation right now. In 6 hours from now, maybe I won't. But yes, I do understand this.
I printed a diagram somewhere. I have to find it.
Yeah.
Somewhere there's a diagram of that.
It should make it into the docs.
Yeah, I thought it was at one point.
I know you wrote a long explanation at one point. Then I created a GitHub issue. Please add to docs with your explanation that you wrote in Telegram.
Right.
Back in the block 1 days, which then nothing happened with that issue. So it's
okay. All right, we'll have to find that and move it over to delete.
Okay, cool. So with all these improvements that we have, I want to get rid of block relay nodes. So I'm trying to figure out that
more.
Say more?
Yeah.
It causes it's a lot of extra infrastructure, right? Just to run a node to relay blocks.
Gotcha.
So we had previously had a discussion about, well, maybe we can come up with like a light node that doesn't keep any state or whatever, and all its job was to relay blocks. But then since we had that conversation, I didn't do anything about it, but Kevin and the rest of the dev team did a lot of work to make sure that the blocks are pushed out first rather than dealing with the transactions. So maybe that mitigates the whole problem, and then we can just, save a whole lot of infrastructure and just get rid of the block relay node.
So I didn't even think about it like that, but yeah.
Yeah, in 4.0, we have that. Like when a block comes in, it interrupts processing so that you can get the block moving along. And matter of fact, it does so. Pretty sure this is in 4.0 as well. It actually does so without touching the main thread in a lot of cases. So it can actually shuffle things along. So yeah, we certainly would like you to try to see whether 4.0 can handle that without a dedicated block relay node or not. And if not, let us know, we can address it. One thing that we haven't addressed yet, and we actually haven't addressed in 5.0 yet either, but we might, and from our conversation we just had, actually makes it more useful. So currently what happens when a block comes in is that we will schedule it to be the most important thing to happen is to deal with that block if we have to on the main thread right away. Now, again, there's a lot of cases we can process it off the main thread immediately and propagate it. But if not, we have to reach into the main thread and do a bit of validation. Then currently that is the highest priority thing that will happen. It will interrupt anything else that's happening. That wasn't the case in 3.2 or prior. Like if you had a whole bunch of unapplied transaction queues and you were starting a block, it would actually wait until a full block time before it would process the block. So that's been fixed. What we haven't done yet, which we may need to, is we don't actually interrupt a transaction that's currently in process. So if we're speculatively executing a transaction, we do not interrupt it when a block comes in. We could, we just have not done that. Currently, the max on most people's nodes is 30 milliseconds that block could then be delayed. Again, only if we have to reach into the main thread, which in most cases we don't. But in the cases we do, it does wait for that transaction to complete.
But if we increase the size of those transactions, then this would have an impact.
Exactly. Now, what we could do, we talked about, and sure, I don't think it's that difficult, is that we could just interrupt the transaction. Right? Like as soon as the block comes in, don't matter what we're doing, just stop the transaction, process the block, and then pick up the transaction again and process it. So we have not made that change even in 5.0, but we certainly could. But even without it, that's kind of a corner case. Like in most cases, we can process the block immediately without touching the main thread. And we can do that if we're in sync. Now, if the node is a block or two behind, then we actually have to kind of schedule it a bit to make that happen. But if it's current, it'll take the block, evaluate its block header, do the signature verification on it, and pass it along the network. And so again, we'd love feedback on 4.0 and whether that's actually allows you not to run a block relay node that only does block.
Yeah. So my challenge with coming up with that analysis is, well, as Ross said before, it's hard to actually do these things on a test net. You need to run it live. In order to run it live, we need the other block producers to upgrade to 4.0. Because, just me upgrading doesn't help. I need to see how it reacts on the network. And in order to do that, then we need the fixes so that then other people can. Anyway, so we're a few steps that we need to accomplish before we can actually do that test. If that makes sense. So I think, if we can start doing this test, maybe, I don't know, at this point, it looks like maybe September is when we'll actually, but then it's too late to make any changes for 5.0 because it's already past the 5.0 window. So anyway, back to Brian's, how can we do things better from a scheduling perspective, maybe? Because it's, it's taking us too long to roll out the next release, and then another one's already, we're always behind. So anyway, okay, good discussion. I don't have any more topics for today.
we want to touch base on those issues, the ship issues. I can give status on them.
Oh, cool.
Okay, that's all nod. So yeah, as been noted, we've had a number of ship issues come in, and unfortunately, we've had almost an embarrassing amount of ship issues of late, right? Whether it's been 3.2 or 4.0 or whatever. So that's, I don't know what we can say there. I mean, we seem to we've not done a great job there. So anyway, we're always trying to improve. We're adding new tests for all these that are coming in. But yeah, so let me just talk about them right quick. The ones I know about that have been logged. So currently we have the fact that we can't sync EOS from Genesis. Issue 1354. That's been evaluated. I know what the bug is. It'll take a few hours to fix. And so we'll get that done. We'll get that done, and it'll be in the next patch release. If you're curious, it has to do with our beloved deferred transaction, and it has to do with the fact whether a given protocol feature has been activated or not. So early on in EOS mainnet, which is where it's being replayed here, is before the activation of a particular protocol feature, and we broke the way we handle that protocol feature when it's not enabled, because we didn't have any tests for that before those blocks that have that. So anyway, it's fairly simple fix. We just got to get it done and in there. It's not the current bug I'm working on. I'll work that next. Actually, what I'm currently looking at is a report from CC32D9, which is a problem with starting up a ship. 2 issues reported, and I just picked this up. I haven't reproduced it yet. But the first issue is the fact that you don't get anything from ship until if you don't have any peers connected. That's kind of like understood. Like I kind of knew it worked that way. Didn't realize that this was a use case. Although once it's stated out loud, it seemed kind of obvious that it's a use case. The way ship works in 4.0 is it waits for that first block to be signaled before it does its thing. It did that to kind of work around a different issue with the way like snapshots were consumed and ship was started up. It kind of delayed that till the first block is received, whether produced or received from the network. The use case here is that you actually want to start from the snapshot, consume data from it before you turn on any peers. Makes sense to have that use case. It just doesn't work that way. So anyway, we can address that. I'm hoping that's not going to be that big of an issue to like solve that and keep the other solution for the other issue we had, which was kind of a startup ship error there. Shouldn't be that big a deal. The other thing that's reported is rather strange and surprising, and I'm not sure what's going on. In that same issue, it says that if you start Chronicle at a certain block number, it doesn't receive the ABI for that connection, which is very odd. And I'm surprised, like if that's really the case, that it hasn't. Other people haven't stumbled upon that as well. So I'm not sure if that's somehow related to not having the PDPs configured there or what. Anyway, so I'm going to dig into that, figure that out. So that's still in like somewhat like trying to reproduce and see what's going on there. First part of it, understood. Yeah, we'll get that fixed. The other part, not sure what's going on there. Okay. The third issue that's been reported is some weird issue with that. If you're connected to ship and then you disconnect, it somehow affects other connections to ship, and that they stop receiving data. And so, yeah, that still is actually no one's actually been picking it up or taking a look at it yet. So it's just still in. That's where we are. I'm actively working these issues right now.
Sounds good. I think the one that's kind of blocking the 404 release is the middle one there.
Yeah, the first one, the Genesis replay from Genesis. I looked at it first because that's scary. That's like consensus level sort of scary, right? Turns out it has nothing to do with consensus. It's not a consensus bug at all. So it kind of its priority went immediately down and got shuffled back into the pile. And then that's why I'm picking up number 2, because that seems to be the higher priority of those 3. Actually, and the first one, again, it's been a bug since 3.1. So like you can't replay EOS mainnet in 3.1 either. I thought somebody had done that. I thought EOS USA had done that back in the 3.1 day, had done a replay of ship from Genesis, but apparently not, because it won't work in 3.1 either. So and we'll get that there.
The third one doesn't work in 3.1 either.
Oh, okay.
So the only one that's kind of blocking 4.0 is the second one.
Okay, and that's the one I'm picking up this morning. So
and because the first one and the third one, in fact, 3.1 as well. So if people are already on 3.1, well, it's not worse.
Right. We certainly want to get those fixed as well. But yes, got it. Thanks.
Yeah, and Michael and I have a workaround for the can't replay ship from Genesis, is that he's using my ship, which then when he started using my ship, then he disconnected it, then it caused all my ship readers to block. So those 2 issues came together because, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, if you guys would just quit using the software, we wouldn't have all these issues.
Truth right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you also wouldn't have a job if we stopped using the software. So.
Oh yeah, well there is that, I guess. Yeah.
So maybe you don't careful what you wish for. Cool. I think it's a good time to stop here, Brian.
Yes, I agree. All right. Well, before we drop, just want to say thanks everybody for participating in the call and for giving your feedback. And I'll be following up soon with details of upcoming patch release for the upcoming patch release. And then again, just a sort of pitch to please send me your Telegram handle along with the BP sort of node name that you operate, so that I can contact you as needed. Thanks, everyone. And I'll hand it back to Daniel.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone. Have an awesome day.
Cool. That was quick. All right. Cheers, guys.